Welcome back to Cinematic Sarcastic, podcast that talks all things movies and television. I'm Natalie, and I'm your host. On today's episode, we are going to talk about Severance. Now, I will just say this isn't really going to be a explanation of the Severance television show or my review of the Severance television show. What I really wanted to do with this episode was tell you guys my theory about what is going on with Severance and have you guys either tell me your theories, confirm my theories, deny my theories, tell me that I'm crazy, because Severance is and has been for a number of years consuming every thought that I have. I know we did have a 3-year break between Severance season 1 and Severance season 2, and I think that we are going to have another at least somewhat considerable, I think probably 2-year break between season 2 and season 3. I know they are in the writing room for Severance season 3 right now, but I think it took them a really long time to write season 2 last time. Notwithstanding, the writer's strike or any of that stuff, it did take them quite a while to kind of work out all of the details. For anyone who knows about Severance, you know that there are no unimportant details in the television show, down to the colors that people are wearing, lines that people say, things that are in the background. Everything has a purpose. So I am sure it takes a really long time to write all of that stuff out and make sure that it connects and makes sense with previous seasons and where they're hoping to go with it and all of that good stuff. So for anyone who isn't really familiar with Severance, this is definitely not going to be the episode for you. There are going to be a lot of spoilers and just details and stuff within this episode that will totally give away a lot of what's going on potentially. So if you haven't watched, I would suggest going and watching season 1 and all of the episodes that are available. I think there are 6 available episodes of season 2 before coming back and telling me what you guys think of my fan theory, I guess, of what's going on in Severance. So we know in Severance season 1 that we are following a particular group of characters, which is Mark, Dylan, Irving, and then we have a new introduction of the character of Helly R. And she is taking over for Petey, who was Mark's sort of best friend inside the Lumen office. Now, I do have one theory that I actually think that Irving is the first person who has gone through reintegration with the doctor that Mark is working alongside with now. And I think that Irving, because the doctor has mentioned a couple of times that she is able to kind of tinker and toy with how she is doing reintegration and that she's getting better at it time after time, I think that Irving is the guinea pig of reintegration. And it's why he sort of kind of knows what's going on with his innie. The innie, when he falls asleep, is able to see the black goo, which pertains to the painting that Irving is painting on the outside, which is the down elevator. He also is making these phone calls, which I haven't figured out necessarily whether or not it is Irving leaving phone calls to himself, or potentially is he leaving phone calls to the doctor that is working with Mark S now. But I think Irving was the first to go through reintegration, that his was successful, but obviously it was probably the first time she had ever done it. So it's not like he's fully reintegrated with his innie and outie, but they have figured out kind of how to connect between the two, because Irving has all of this information about what's going on inside Lumen, who the employees are, who the severed employees are, which I don't think he would necessarily be able to get without the help of his innie. And he also has definitely been in the down elevator. He knows where it is. I'm not sure if he knew the location beforehand, because I do think that the woman in optics and design potentially is the one that gave him the directions that he left for Dylan in season 2 on how to get to the down elevator, but he at least knows about it, which leads me to believe that he has been there before. His outie, is aware of it. Whether or not his innie is aware that he's been there before, I'm not sure. Maybe it's something they communicated did previously before, something happened with his innie. But I think that Irving is the one that convinced Petey to do it, knowing that because Petey and Mark S were good friends, that Petey would be able to convince Mark S to do it, whether from inside of Lumen or outside of Lumen. But I don't think, and here is where I'm going to start to get a little bit woo-woo in terms of Severance. I personally do not think that Severance works if you are still alive. I think that everyone on the severed floor who has the little pill chip in their brain, I think that they are either brain dead or actually dead. I think that the only way that it can be severed, potentially, I haven't quite worked out exactly how this works, whether it's reanimating them in some way or whether they just are not alive. Again, this is going to be very far-fetched. I'm not sure how this works or ties into the other people that are around. For instance, Devin, Mark's sister, her husband, the book, all of his friends in that community. But they are all living inside of Cure PE, which is like it's kind of a company-run city. So it's not like a United States city that we would be familiar with. I think the cars are all pretty outdated. The cell phones that people have are what I would consider pretty outdated. I wonder if it's their own little thing and if nobody inside that particular village happens, or town, I guess, happens to be alive anymore. And why I say this is there is additional stuff. Lumen has like a LinkedIn page, they have a website and all of that stuff. So they've put out additional stuff, right? There's all of this lore and all of this crazy stuff that goes along with Lumen and the show. And I think they've linked up and done some other stuff, but they've released some additional things. Like you can get the Lumen handbook if you go online and look for it. And you can get a bunch of other little like details and documents that are not present inside the show or mentioned inside the show outside online places. Like you can even, refine data on the Lumen webpage, right? And so there is a document that was released, which now has completely escaped my head in terms of what it was called. I want to say it was like Lakeview or something of that nature. I think that that's totally wrong. It's spaced me out and I didn't take notes for it. But there is this document that was put out from a whistleblower that was inside Lumen. She was working at a different location. So not the location that we are watching in the Severance show with Mark and Helly S and all of that stuff. She was working at a different location and she discovered or kind of figured out how to communicate with her innie back and forth. And so she finds herself sort of fired from Lumen because of the fact that she can go back and forth with her innie, right? And it causes a whole bunch of trouble for her. And she was talking about something that had happened when she was micro refining data, or macro refining data, that once something had been completed that she was working on, one of the sort of city names that she was working on, that this terrible thing had happened and it caused a lot of death. And now I have seen all online a lot of people talking about how the names of the files that everyone is working on in MDR in the show are all names of cities where there is a dam or some kind of like waterway or, something of that nature that is close to the city. And Lumen's little identification mark for their business is a water droplet. So what I think is happening, and this is why the numbers that are going on the screen are scary to the people that are refining this data, because I think that they're either reanimated dead or they maybe, drowned and were resuscitated after the chip was put in potentially. But I think when they reach 100%, what they're doing is they're hacking into either the dam system or, whatever it is that's controlling the water that is connected to those towns, or some sort of something that is connected to those towns in terms of water that is either breaking those dams, opening those dams, and flooding out those cities and killing everyone in the city. And then potentially Lumen is able to go into those cities, set up a Lumen office, because we know that they've got multiple different office locations, set up a Lumen office, either reanimate people somehow or, sever them somehow and bring them back. And then they have this whole process of people that now are able to work for them who, don't really know what's going on. I haven't quite worked out exactly, again, like I said earlier, how that works with the people that are just sort of normally living, like his sister and her husband and such, if they either don't know that they have passed over, and so they are just against Lumen, because they don't realize that they are also chipped, because they're not being severed, or they don't know that they're being severed. I haven't quite worked that out. I haven't quite worked out exactly what's going on with the colors either. But I do think that it is related to either different types of death or stages of death. And I know that like Heli R comes in and you're like, well, Heli R chose to be severed, but I find it very interesting that the first reaction that Heli R has when she comes in, obviously she doesn't want to be there, right? She doesn't want to be in any, and she completely tries to get away. She tries to escape. She tries to quit. She tries to leave. And when that doesn't work, she has that elevator sequence where she attempts to unalive herself. I think Helena, who is the Audi, had already done that. I think she already had unalived herself, whether from the pressure of being, next in line potentially for the Lumen Empire, or potentially knowing that it's not going to pass to her, because I think it's only been passed down from man to man. So I think she has to have like a husband or a son or something of that nature in order for that to be like handed down to her. But I think she already was a little bit unhinged or unhappy prior to that, and that potentially what they're able to do, and this is why Audis, are a little bit weird, but I think potentially what they're able to do is erase the memory of you having taken your own life. And so I think that's where it kind of comes in. Like, I think, for instance, that Mark S., his wife, we obviously know that she is still alive. She is Miss Casey, and that she was Gemma on the outside. I don't know if she either purposefully drove her car into the tree or if that was an actual accident and Lumen was able to get to her first and sort of sever her. And so potentially, like I was saying, she potentially could be in a coma, but Lumen was able to like sever her so that at least she has an innie, even if she doesn't have an outie anymore. And Mark happens to mention, the stages of grief and the bargaining that you would do and how he would drink less and listen more. And we do know that he is a bit of an alcoholic. And so potentially he had done something with that to take his own life. And I think that that kind of is confirmed for me a little bit, because when he starts to sort of reintegrate himself, and when that starts to work and go better, he starts to get really, really hungry, like ravenous hungry. And when you see all of the employees inside Lumen, they have a certain number of tokens for snacks. They are not eating a ton of stuff inside the Lumen offices, certainly not to the extent that like a regular employee would. They've had like a waffle party or something, but it's not a ton of food. And even when they have, their little parties, it's usually fruit. It's usually, they're not eating a large amount. It's separated between like 4 people. And so I don't know if it's like this reanimation thing where you are in some kind of a limbo between life and death. And so your body is not consuming as many resources. We haven't really seen Mark S., for instance, eat all that much. I don't know how necessarily this works for all of them. Again, I haven't like really fully fleshed out a lot of this stuff, but I do think that they are potentially that Lumen has already killed everyone in that town through macrodata refinement and then just plopped another location there. And now all of the employees are connected or tied together. Again, I'm not sure if like all the Lumen employees, for instance, like Miss Cobell or Milchek, I'm not sure if they are also, or if they are separate from this in terms of, you know, being different from everyone else, that they're still alive and they know who isn't. I think the goats, that this is where kind of like the goats come in, because you have like the baby goats that they are working on. And when Heliar and Mark go and discover them, the guy is like visibly afraid, thinking that they're coming to take the baby goats. And he's like, they're not ready. They're not ready. And I think it's because they are going to unalive the baby goats and sever them and kind of do some experiments on that to learn more things about what you can do with the severed. And we know that there are older goats in that other area where him and Heliar did go and discover a whole bunch of other people as well that were there. So we know at least at some point or through some sort of something, you know, the goats are still alive or still being utilized, still being cared for. So I think that it's just part of their research department in terms of all of that stuff. I think that there is additional of that happening downstairs as well. I think that's what is down there. I think that's where the doctor used to work. And we saw like in the first episode of season 2 that they've replaced that doctor. There's a new one who came to OND to get like dental equipment and stuff. So I haven't quite worked out all of the details or all of what's going on, but I think that's what they're doing. I think in macrodata refinement, they're either hacking into something. I think that's why it terrifies them, because they kind of know that there is danger, you know, in sort of maybe a paranormal way, that they can sense that death coming or, you know, the tragedy coming. And that's why the numbers scare them, and somehow that's helping them to either hack into these dams, or I haven't quite put everything together, but this is sort of what I think is going on with Lumen. I do think it is very nefarious. I think that we kind of know that with like Bert and his partner Fields. I think that there is something going on there. Bert is definitely working with Lumen. I've never seen Christopher Walken, for instance, play just a 100%, you know, goody two-shoes character. So I think that there is more going on with Bert, potentially because he has, I think Fields mentions, you know, 20 years ago, you had this other partner that was an innie. And so I don't know if there is something to that, if Bert is being utilized to have certain relationships with certain characters. I know that there is definitely something going on in terms of romantic relationships inside Lumen. And I don't know if that ties into if a romantic connection will wake you up to the knowledge of what has happened to you. And that's why, you know, Cobell is interested in whether or not Mark remembers Gemma when he's in his like wellness visits, and she brings the candle to kind of see if she can spur it along, if potentially those romantic relationships help in some way, if having a baby with another innie helps in some way to remind you of life, remind you of having a life. I'm not sure. I know I've seen quite a lot of theories in terms of like Lumen is just breeding babies. That could also work here. I'm not really sure. I'm going the deeply morbid route, I feel like, in terms of Severance, because I feel like Lumen is doing something seedy, something gross, something awful. The other paper, you know, that came out where she was almost certain that she had caused this terrible thing that caused a whole bunch of deaths to happen. I just think that Lumen is potentially doing that on purpose. So I don't know. You guys are going to have to let me know what you think, if I am way out in left field and absolutely crazy, or if you have other fan theories that you think are more believable or work better or explain things better. Do share them with me. I would really love to know. I'm consumed with Severance season 2 right now. I think I've watched season 1 like 6 times at this point, and I have to watch it again because I feel like I'm still like missing things, or there are little things that are tying in. that I can't quite wrap my head around, but I really wanted to share that with you guys, wanted to share my fan theory on what's going on with Severance a little bit, and sort of hopefully get some conversation going around what you guys think is going on with Severance, because it's making me crazy. If anyone has connections to Ben Stiller and can just figure it out and ruin it for me, I'm fine with that. I just really want to know what's going on. But those are my thoughts around what's going on in Severance. I'd love to know what you guys thought. If you're watching and you have fan theories, subscribe to join the Movie Nerd family, and I hope to see you in the next episode.